remember.
Right. Okay, take it away.
So, William, good evening. You're such a star because you've driven back from Bicton to get home to be able to do this with us. And we're itching to know what you think of the course. Have you walked a 4-star yet?
Oh, well, yes, we talk about Bicton. Yeah, I decided to pop home. It's much easier than trying some service down at Bicton, which is dodgy at the best of times. And you're coming down tomorrow, so you will see the course yourself. But I was impressed. I think it's a course that makes you look up, makes you really think about things, and ask questions, I would say, from number 6 to number 26. And it's quite solid, as in the questions come thick and fast. I'd say everyone's twitching a bit. I think everyone's slightly got ants in their pants and thinking, crumbs, we've not done anything like this for quite a long time. You know, we've gone
not since Bramham 219.
Yes, that's quite a long time ago.
Yeah,
she's got 4 quite serious hills.
Yeah.
And you know, you and I know that we've been going on the flat for God knows how long. We've been going around Houghton, Burnham Market.
Yeah.
We haven't gone up a hill. So it's going to be quite a shock for a lot of horses to suddenly have to be fit enough to get round, to be honest. I think it's a real 4-star. We haven't had one for a while. We know last year Burnham Market was on the soft side. We know this year, okay, we had Aston the Walls, which is a super track. But that looks quite easy compared to this. And we all thought Aston the Walls was looking bigger than normal. And then we had last week Houghton, which by comparison looks like a hunter trial.
Wow, I can't wait to see it.
I think you'll love it, but there's a lot of skinnies and corners, a lot of the turning 5s and the turning 6s and the this and the turning 3s, and that's all the fashion at the moment, all these S-bends and curves. And at the moment, you know, the ground is quite firm, but they're aerating and they're going to water, so that will be good. But they do need to. When you think a week ago, we were being towed into Houghton, weren't we?
Yes,
for the
exactly.
First time in history. And literally last week was Mill Street, and that was a bottomless bog.
Mill Street, Ireland, yeah.
And here we are this weekend down at Bicton on the fairly firm ground. So it's going to be a test. If it was soft, it would be really serious, I would say.
Yes, really serious. So I think we want to fly on now with what we're here to chat about, which is for me, the most fascinating part of the whole shindig of the sport is developing a horse from the beginning to get to the level that they need to have arrived at in order to be able to take on what you've just described to us on Saturday and Sunday. So I love your input, William. If you're faced with your green horse, let's not worry too much about teaching the riders. Just what will you be looking out to teach your green horse that you've captured?
Yes, I think we all do things differently, don't we? And I really believe in taking time with these youngsters. I think nowadays we all get so pressurized, and young horse classes at 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and they've got to do this and do that, and they've got to go inside the time, and it's all got to be pretty smart pretty quickly. And I think we really forget that their early days are so important, and some horses do take longer than others. Some horses will not be ready for young horse classes. Some horses might win badminton one year and they won't have won a 5, 6 or 7-year-old class. So I think we've got to remember what the long-term goal is. And yes, you might want to produce your horse to bring on and sell and make money, or you might want to be producing a long-term 5-star professional. And I think really taking your time in the beginning and adjusting to the horse you've got. You know, some are really quick and switched on at 4, and some are just jolly thick. And you've got to react to that. And you know, I'm a big believer in you know, taking the time at young horses and really teaching them stuff slowly. Horses learn slowly. When we all are quick and do things quickly, horse doesn't really know what he's done. And the amount of people that just crack on and jump from canter from day one, just canter, jump, canter, jump, canter, jump. They don't do any slow work, no trot, none of the walk we've spoken about, nothing for the horses to digest and learn. So I'm a big believer in taking that slowness into learning early on, so they can jolly well help you out later on when they need to. And that's our job, is to really get that ingrained from day one, isn't it?
Yeah, the way I tend to describe it to myself and thence to people I try to help is, a young horse is like a child learning to read. They need short words and big letters, and they're going to take their time reading, and they're going to take their time reading the fence. When they become 5 years later a top level horse that can go, we hope, round Bicton, they are like an adult who can speed read a paperback in 40 minutes. They just come around the corner, see it, work it out, and jump it all in the time that I've just done that.
Yeah.
A young horse needs time to think and put his finger in his mouth and say what. But the underlying motto that's emblazoned on my heart, and I'm absolutely sure it will be on yours, but do tell me if it isn't, is that I'm never going to let my horse understand that there is an option to stop or there is an option to run out. It's just not going to happen. So I have got to be really clever about how I gauge how much he does. And I'd always rather do too little than too much, or too small than too big.
Absolutely.
Because you're stuffed if he does stop, and you can't then trot back to it because it was a little bit too big in the first place.
That's so important. There's a very good point, that, and I think less is more. Really, really remember that. And we all know, and we're all guilty sometimes, that you want to give in your lesson, you want to give the rider something, you want them to go home thinking, oh goodness, I've just done this or I've just done that. And humans are very tempted by that little bit of taking a bit of a risk and getting away with it, and someone coming home, really feeling that they're, the feathers are out and how prim and proper they are, and it's all looking so wonderful because they jumped this really difficult jump. And I think as a trainer, we're all slightly tempted to indulge that human desire, and it's so often wrong. So often when you teach, one more is the wrong one. Stopping earlier is, I believe, such an important thing for the confidence.
Yeah, I so agree. And I often find myself feeling I must stop. And then I look at my watch. I know they've all paid a fortune and we've still got 20 minutes left. And every now and again, I make the mistake of saying, we'll just do another go or round or whatever. And every time my instinct to stop was right. Every time it's wrong. So now I just say, I don't want you to feel I've undercut you because you've all paid a lot of money or whatever it is. But let's now just hop off the horses and chat, because there's so much to be discussed that you don't have your horse for.
And I sometimes do exactly that. And I say, look, does anybody here really want to do something that we haven't done today? So I throw the ball very much in their court. And if there is something, we can have a little pop. But 90% of the time, people say, you know what, as you say, we'll just chat and got some questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. We talk about giving a horse time. A time is one of the greatest commodities that any of us, I think, possess, and we need to put it our horse's way. We need to put it our way sometimes too, but we know how difficult it is to find it. And I think you never ever want to be in a hurry with a young horse. And if you've got a 20-minute slot and you've got something important to do afterwards, don't do it. Just do something else, because he doesn't need to have that little bit of pressure put on him. If he has to spend 5 minutes with his finger in his mouth looking at a fence and you're not turning away, because we always start with really baby, somewhere like Rabson that you won't know, those of you that live abroad, but it's not far from, in the southwest of England, not far from Swindon. And they have a little tiny area where the fences are walkable. And that is fabulous for a young horse because there's no speed involved. They just go up, they look, maybe they spook, they try and move left, they try and move right. And all you've got to say is, no, keep going forwards. And they walk a little bit, and they walk a little, then they might make a huge jump over it, or they might just step over it, doesn't matter. And you go all around these 8-10 different types of fences, all under a foot high in walk. And then the next stage up, which is usually the stage that I think most people arrive at a cross-country course and find, would be my trotting stage. We would be trotting everything. And if you do get a little bit ahead of the movement and they do stop. I try not to have to turn away, but I don't want them jumping from a standstill, because remember that 6 foot area in front of them is a blind spot, just like apparently directly behind them is a blind spot, which is why we never want to walk up to a horse without him having seen us first. But in that area in front of him, when he's stopped, he actually can't see what he's trying to jump. Can you rein your young horse back? It's a damn good thing to learn. And I have to tell you, the cowboys, before they go forwards, they learn to go backwards. And the cowboys are serious horsemen, a lot of them. So if you can teach your horse to rein back before you start jumping, good on you.
But I think that's a very good point. I'm going to interrupt there. I think it's so important to take in the fact that Lucinda just said about there is no such thing in an event horse's mind as a second go. They've got to learn from day one. You ask the question, they can be slow, they can be unsure, but there is no such thing as chance B. So they've got to jump it. I'm probably a bit, I would say, as I'm introducing trotting and jumping, I would say if the jump is knee height or below her, they can jolly well jump it from a standstill. And I don't bother with rein back. No. Once you get bigger, I totally agree. Back a few steps, and that's my job as a trainer, because obviously young horses don't always go backwards. You back them up 2 or 3 steps, and you have another go, as you say, to not be jumping too big from a standstill, because that is dangerous. But I would say at that stage, you should not be jumping higher than the knee, and in which case, it couldn't matter where you get to. They can walk over it. Yeah.
No, it's lovely. And I love the horse's brain. I love watching. One of my greatest fascinations is watching the horse's eye. And I'm trying to grow another eye that watches the rider. But what I really love watching is the horse's eye, because his eye tells you exactly what he's thinking, and usually exactly what he's going to do. There's some of them have this sort of glazed look, and I find them very, very hard to read. But an awful lot of horses tell you exactly, rather like people, through their eye. As a rider, when you're teaching people on young horses, I think I make a point of saying, it doesn't matter what you look like, because believe me, jumping young horse, you're going to be thrown all over the place, because they jump like this and they jump like that. You've just got to try and remember that the reins are not handlebars. And if you're already an experienced rider, you have your natural balance, you can let go of the reins when the horse does one of those strange jumps over 1'6". But if you're not yet there, you will use those reins as handlebars, and the horse will possibly not want to.
And
the next
and you should have a neck strap.
You're the one who always says this. I can never find the beastly thing. How do you find it? What do you do? Do you ride in with it?
Sometimes you just learn to use it. I wasn't allowed to ride without one. So I've learned that before the reins, you take the neck strap and you get your hands in that forward position. And quite often on a young horse, I do grab hold of it. I mean, I might not hold onto it going around badminton, but I certainly wouldn't leave the start box. If it wasn't on, I couldn't go.
I love that. I think that's wonderful. I've never, ever worked out how to use one. And I always remember you saying, I'm not leaving the start box without one. Good on you. That's wonderful. That you could say, we agree on so much, but you could say that's one of the places we differ, because you've learned to hook a finger through it or hook a hand through it.
Yeah,
and I never did. The only time I do is when
it's just the finger.
It's amazing how one finger can balance the whole of my body. Quite extraordinary. And if I'm ever made to ride a racehorse, if it hasn't got a neck strap on, I'm terrified, because what else do you hold on to when your knees are under your chin?
But my goodness, it can save a horse's mouth.
Yeah.
And I was teaching in America quite recently, and I had a group of people that were quite green. And one of my challenges of the session was to make them be able to hold the neck strap the whole way through the whole jump. No one could keep hold of it. They all grabbed it on takeoff. And then because their balance had gone, they were completely lost it on landing. No one could stay there and actually carry on. It was interesting.
How do they give with the contact if they've got their hand nearly rigid on the neck strap? How does the reins get given, or do they let the reins slip?
You're not allowed to hold the reins rigidly. You've got to let the rein go if it's taken from a nice hand.
So you have the neck strap rigid and you have the reins on an open finger, so to speak.
Yes, more relaxed. So the reins there if they don't take it, and if they take it, they can pull it forward.
You can pull it through your fingers.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to go and try this because I've never succeeded. I love it. I also, there's so much to discuss, and we, as ever, don't want to be not taking your questions because this is so much a discussion that we're just kicking off now in order to light the fire in your mind so that you can ask us questions that we can discuss. But I was thinking I'd like to say, and I'd love your input on it too, William, 2 things that I find really helpful. One is there's usually a bank with a couple of small sides, and I don't want them bigger than a sleeper or a sleeper and a half. And I get people to walk up and down those on that long rein. I call it the Irish rein.
Yeah.
Irishmen, you've all seen them make these 3-year-olds jump huge ditches and banks on a long rein, but they never let them go the pace that you don't want them to go. They never let them lose their line. So I try and get them to use this Irish rein, which I guess is a little bit, if you were thinking dressage, is the long rein in dressage. And they're not allowed to lose their line. They're not allowed to go into trot. They have to walk up and banks and down banks. And by the way, when they're really green, get them to go up a bank and turn around and come down the same bank. Because if you go down a new bank, the green horse and the green rider go, oh. So try and go down the one you've gone up. I've only ever once in my life in America had a horse that I could not get up the bank. And it came down, but it would not go up. I still to this day don't know why not. We're talking about that big. And then I've got some little skinny plastic wings, sponge foam wings, and I have 4-foot rails, and I just put those on their side, so they're about this big, but they've got to get through these quite spooky wings, put those after the banks, and we do that up and down the banks. And it was fascinating the other day. And then eventually we do the exercise in trot, and I'll move the plastic things further away or at an angle, and then we do it in canter. So they've done the whole exercise in canter. We put the plastic things a little bit higher, so they end up like a jump. And it was really interesting. I was teaching up in the north the other day, and somebody said to me, gosh, that was fascinating doing that exercise in walk. We've never ever done cross country in walk. You know, all we ever hear when we have our lessons is more leg, more leg, more leg. And the wonderful thing about walk, especially when you're helping people that are still not experienced, but Jesus, it's good for an advanced horse too, to just relax and take his time and walk up and down banks. But the wonderful thing about it is there is so much time, and they all get their positions. I never have to say anything about where they should sit as they come off a bank, because they're in no hurry. And they're walking and they're understanding how the horse needs to look down the bank. Firstly, they've got to soften their fingers and let him look, but not let him run out. They learn so many skills incredibly slowly. And at the same time, guess what? The young horse is building his confidence because nobody's putting him under pressure. So
there's no momentum.
There's no momentum, exactly. And the momentum takes you out just as much as it can take you over. So that's great fun. The other thing I find incredibly helpful, and this is just to help anybody who wants some ideas, and you've probably already got both these ideas well in your head, is I always ask for a couple of blue barrels, white barrels, 44-gallon drums, preferably with the lids on, because in Australia once I did have a horse knock the barrel into the water and jump straight into it. That was all right, but it wasn't ideal. So yes, so I do say, if possible, barrels with lids on, and I've given up with the metal ones. They make too much noise and scare the horses. And then I start with them with two poles to stop them running into the water, one either side, restraining poles apart, and they walk out of the water. Always walk out first because they often don't want to walk in between the barrels. And then gradually the hole gets smaller and smaller, and they start walking and trotting and cantering. Gradually there's no hole at all, and now you've got your horse jumping out over the barrels and back into the water. So he's doing his first jump into water without any hassle at all, because you built him up from a gap that you've gradually made smaller. And I often leave a little gap, so the rider still feels, oh, there's still a gap, even though they couldn't possibly fit through it. And I found that incredibly helpful for teaching young horses to jump into water. And if they suddenly stop, you just open the barrels, through you go. You don't even have to turn away.
And I'm interrupting. Would you have a wing on that? Would you have poles as the wing to start off? Or would you just start off with the barrels?
No, because I'm a little bit different to you on this. I never use wings. I'll tell you why. Because I've got my people for such a short time. I want them to learn to put their horses in that tube of their legs. And if they have a wing, they are going to get helped by the wings. So I say your legs have got to be the wings. You've got one barrel there, and nothing. And do you know they very rarely run past it? They get the idea of having to keep the horse in.
That's an interesting idea, because if I'm thinking about the horse, forget teaching the riders. I would always start with a wing so the horse never learns to run out.
Yeah.
Because I can
if you put a hole in the middle, they go through the hole.
Yes.
So you've got the idea. Anyhow, it is fascinating because I know we've chatted about this before, that I'm of the opinion that I don't ever want my horse running out, but I want my rider to learn how to prevent it.
Yes.
If I put a wing up, my rider's not going to learn. And you quite understandably say, I don't want my horse or their horse ever learning to run out, so I'm going to put a wing up just in case. So you guys listening, you must take your choice. That's a really good, interesting one, which you'd prefer to do. Both are right or both are wrong, whichever
way. I think we're both right, but it's an interesting approach. It's a different approach. I do agree with you. We've got to learn to teach the horse to run out, but if to teach the rider to stop the horse running out.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. And I think that if I'm working a young horse, I don't want the young horse to ever think that he can run out. And if you're teaching someone you don't know and you have 2 or 3 run-outs, then the lesson becomes a bit on a downward spiral quite early on, and then you're kind of patching up bits and bobs. Whereas you taught him in the beginning to jump everything with a wing, and you take the wings off, he's at least looking to go straight. But I know, as you say, the rider isn't learning what to do to keep the horse straight. So there is a balance between rider and horse.
It's really fascinating. I mean, I've just come off a few clinics of quite inexperienced riders, which I know a lot of you guys out there to teach, because that is our bread and butter. Yeah. And if they run out the first time, I say, right, I'm going to say something really horrible now. So be ready for this. And all the class is going, Christ. And this is, I say, right, if you run out, you can't ride. If you stop, you can't kick. And I know which one I would rather be accused of. So if they run out again, which sometimes happens, I say, you've just repeated the exact same pattern. You've just trained your horse to run out. The fence is probably that big. And I sort of sometimes put it down on the floor, whatever, but I'll never put a wing up. They've got to work it out themselves. They've got to find that feeling of getting a horse to stay straight. So that is an interesting difference that we both...
And another question, would you prefer a stop or a run out?
I prefer stop. Because
see, I prefer a run out.
I can't ride if I have a run out, because I've let it happen. If I stop, I just haven't jolly well kicked hard enough. It's a beastly thing to say, and I only worked it out last year, and I've been saying it a lot. And sometimes I say it at the wrong time and they burst into tears, so I have to be a bit careful when I say it.
Well, I was brought up that a stop was a sin, and a run out was just a cock up.
Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Maybe that's a little bit kinder. Maybe I should have to adopt that, William. Oh dear.
I think a stop was a complete swear word.
It is. That's beautiful. I love that. I really like that. I'm going to use that. And a run out is a cock up. Yeah, that's probably a rather good way of putting it. Oh dear. Do you have any little exercises, like I was explaining, the barrels in the water, so that you can get a horse to jump into water with really no hassle? Have you any fun tips?
No, I think I'm probably not as intuitive as that. I think
what it really is, I've been
I do
5 years and you haven't. You've been riding high whilst I've been slogging away.
I've got a lot to learn on that front, that's for sure. I tell you what I do is I'm a big believer in that when the horse has learnt to jump, and hopefully you taught him on the lunge a little bit as a 3-year-old and you popped over a few fences, he very quickly needs to learn just to jump proper jumps, not show jumps. So I would get out there and jump a log, jump a little step, jump a little drop, jump a little bush, and jump things that don't just fall over, those blinking plastic poles that we all hate so much. Want to be avoided at all the costs, not to punish the horse, but just so they learn they do have to think where their feet are. They do have to be clever, because if they don't, they get a clonk.
It hurts.
But we all know that a lot of young horses just couldn't care less. They go over a pole, oh dear, never mind, come round, tread on again, and not quite sure where their legs are. They don't really register. Whereas if it's a solid log or a telegraph pole, they just do remember. And the other thing that I do with a young horse is I would never go cross-country schooling for the first time without having a grown-up horse as a lead. So yes, you can do all you like. Sometimes they've got to see another horse go to follow that, whether it's into water or over a ditch.
I agree.
I had a young horse the other day that was a real, absolutely glued to the ground before a ditch. Absolutely.
Lovely way of putting it.
Would not do it. And he would not budge. And he'd had a lead, he'd had a whack, and there's no point getting cross. And he was completely cold about it and just said, I'm not jumping. The ditch was only 1 foot. And the only thing that made him go over the end was a holly bush under his tail.
No.
Yeah. And I thought that was,
or stuck under his tail.
No, I shoved it. But it was the only thing that made him go. And it wasn't cruelty, but it was just interesting that changed his perspective of giving him a smack. He just thought, oh, sod you, get off. No, I'm not moving. But a good little prickle under his sensitive tail.
Hey, can you tell me how you do that when you're riding?
No, I wasn't riding. I'm far too old. I'm not the rider.
So you've got a rider on him?
Yes.
And if the holly bush makes him buck too bad?
Yes, the rider has to hold the neck strap.
True. So just explain to me, I'm fascinated anatomically. How do you do that? Because he might kick you.
No, I'm quick at moving.
So is it a big holly bush? You just prod him?
Oh yes, it's plenty big enough anyway, and I've got long arms.
I love it, and that made him go.
And that was the only thing, and we'd been there for 20 minutes.
You know, I have to explain to you that very, very quickly. I didn't know how to get, and this happened with 2 different mares in 2 different countries. They would not, as you say, glued to the ground. So I said, I've got to go. There's 4 other people in the class. I've got to keep going, but you really shouldn't give up. And when I came back, there were 1 man either side of a show jumping pole pushing this mare over the ditch, and it worked. I couldn't believe my eyes, and it actually made it do it. They literally lifted its bottom up and pushed it over. I thought, you know, leave people alone. Don't give them ideas, and they'll work something out if they don't want to be defeated.
I've got a similar very funny story from my youth, which was a long time ago, which nowadays would be absolutely the criminal. I had a horse that wouldn't jump a ditch at home, and my mother, lovely mother, put a lunge line round my horse's bottom, and she tied either end of the lunge line to the tow bar of the Land Rover and drove over the ditch, and the horse came to. And it worked.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I could
and
tell
of course,
you stories like that.
It didn't jump on the Land Rover, which is what you'd have thought it would do. As it took off, the Land Rover was kind of on the landing side, but it saw not to do that.
So it learned a bit about traffic at the same time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wonderful. I love that. Oh gosh, what fun.
I said, you will jump a ditch.
I think it's sort of moving on a little bit. We're talking a little bit about educating horses, how you get them to read. And I think we've got the message from both of us that time is golden, but they must never be allowed to take so much time that they stop and fall asleep in front of the fence. Horses will slow down because it takes them a long time to get in their sights what it is they're looking at. So you can't stop that. They are going to slow down. Your job, I always say, is to stay behind the slowing down, which sometimes can be dramatic and be such a quick movement, even in walk, that our job is to keep our bodies behind that jerk. And I say keep their hind legs moving, because if you keep that kick, they have got to go somewhere. They've got to jump. But people say, oh, he slowed down, He's going to slow down. You know, some of them have got hazy eyes. They need to put their specs on to look what they're doing. So I think when you're teaching, people must understand that horses are not machines. They don't know what the jump is. You've walked the course, you do. They're going to slow down. Your job is to stay behind the slowing down and keep the engine going. And then
keep going. Yeah, keep kicking. And I think now, if we're progressing too fast, we're all too worried about striding and everything else and getting it all correct, and we forget to blink and kick.
Yeah, absolutely. When we have a combination with a young horse, I'm sure you all have the same situation. You have either they're so intent on the first bit that they get a real shock when they jump it and land and find a second bit, or they see the second bit as they come to the first bit and sort of annihilate the first bit. Either of those things can happen when you put two fences together. And I think it's very important that you do the first fence in trot to start with, so that they, even if they tumble over it, it isn't too bad. And then you pick them up and say, come on, there's another one, take me out. Just getting horses to sort of think of more than one thing at once. I think there's a moment in their education when they've got to be able to do that. I don't know when you start putting combinations in.
Yeah, again, it's very dependent on your horse, but I would like to begin to start to do combinations when they're 4. And again, you'd find a few logs in a row, and you try to, start off with them being 3, 4, 5 strides, and you can shorten it up to finding little small ones. But as you say, it's got to be small enough that when they do see, oh my goodness, the second one, panic, they can slow down and they can still go. So that they're learning that a succession of jumps is a good thing. I wouldn't necessarily be jumping combinations and grids in my school on my 4-year-old very often at all. I wouldn't be jumping much in the way of double bounces and trebles and that sort of grid work at all. But I do think they should get used to things happening in succession and just be, nice and small enough that you can just wagon them on down the line, and bit crooked and a bit.
I'm very interested in what you say, and I wholeheartedly agree, but there'll be some people who will be asking, why shouldn't you do a bounce in the school and a grid in the school at 4? Is it a physical thing you think it's too much for them, or mentally too much?
I think you can jump, of course you can jump a little bounce, but I think you got to do what you think they're strong enough to do. And you got to think, why do you need to jump a grid in the school? What am I jumping a grid for? I'm just waiting until he's strong enough to go. So why do I want to jump a grid that's going to frighten him? Which he doesn't need to be asked that question yet anyway. I think we all get very carried away with progression and development and doing more and more and more. And sometimes you got to ask yourself why.
So right. So right. There's an extraordinary maturity that happens in horses later and later and later. They are so not the finished model at 6. They're so not the finished model at 7. And in fact, one of those wonderful guys that does chiropractic on horses said to me a couple of years ago that the joints sort of finish, and I've got the wrong word here, sort of finish, maturing and are glued together at all different ages for different joints. And he said the last one and I'm sorry about the wrong word, to seal is the pelvis, and it doesn't happen until they're 8.
Really?
7 or 8.
Wow.
Here we are going around Blenheim at 8 and 9-year-old classes, and the main joint of our whole horse is the pelvis, and it still hasn't set. Isn't that fascinating? It all happens at different stages during their maturity. And there's no doubt about it that horses change year in, year out. They get better. Why? Because they're getting stronger. And in the good old days, we didn't do a lot with 4 and 5-year-olds. Now we expect them to be winning classes at 5 and most certainly at 6. And I'm thinking, is this necessary? Actually, have they really matured enough mentally and physically? And is that why we have lame horses after lame horses? Because we're doing too much too soon. And yet we had Yogi on the academy not long ago, the cross country academy, giving us an understanding of foal to 5-year-old and how he would do quite a lot with them at 2 and 3 and 4, but with sporadic gaps and time off so that they could mature, and he'd have them ready to go at 5. And veterinary wise, he said the vets have worked out that they need a bit of their tendons and ligaments and bones put under certain pressure, not much, but the pressure they're going to get later, they need to start that early and then they'll stay sounder. So that's the other side of the fence. It's interesting.
And I think it is bits of pressure. I think it's very much judging what bits of pressure are, because people get very confused about what they think a bit of pressure is. And yes, by all means, maybe break your horse in at 2 and 3 and do more, but you're still not talking jumping big jumps and galloping fast and breaking him down, because then by the time he's 6, he's going to be not lasting very long. So I think you've got to think also about the longevity of that horse and not wearing him out when he's a youngster, educating him, teaching the ligaments and tendons to stretch and be flexible is all well and good. but at the same time, that horse does not want muscular pressure that he's not going to be able to cope, cope with his body to do. And I think a lot of us forget that. We're determined to get our horses jumping 120 and doing nice dressage tests, sitting trot and stuff when they're 6. And some, as you say, just aren't physically ready. And yes, their joints and ligaments might have been prepared when they're young. Doesn't mean to say that their muscle development is enough to do it. So don't confuse the two things.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I mean, we have the World Young Horse Championships, as France has taken on the mantle of calling Lion d'Angers, where you have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old championships, which I don't know how they are now, William. They used to be pretty stern courses, and I'm sure there's some horses that just simply will never be ready for that 6 or 7-year-old class, and others that can manage it.
I think that's very true. I think certain horses do it. I've had certain horses that have done it. I'm nearly embarrassed to say that I did win the 6-year-olds in Lyon once, and I never quite know how I had a horse that was ready to even be there, let alone win it.
And that horse lasts a long time thereafter.
That's a good question. He lasted reasonably long, but no, in my opinion, he was probably never going to last long. I think the way God made him was probably to be a good young horse. Yeah. And he was a little bit of a chunky monkey, maybe a little bit of a non-galloper. He went on, he won Pau, so he went to 5-star level. He was meant to be my Olympic horse in London, and sadly he went lame that year, did a suspensory when he was hopefully was my #1 choice for London.
What was his?
He was called Oslo.
Oslo, and he was 10 at London?
Yeah, he would have been 10.
Yeah, it's a lovely horse too.
But
interesting that he was the one that came through the 6-year-olds.
Yes, and he was a very
16-year-old.
The most precocious young horse I've ever had.
Yeah.
And he didn't last. He didn't make old bones. He did go around Badminton after he'd done his suspensory. So he came back and did that. And
then that was it.
He didn't make old bones. No, he's had a complicated life there on. He's kind of he had leg issues, and that was all coming right. And then his hocks decided to fuse anyway. So I don't know whether that was because he'd done too much when he was young, or because they were going to fuse anyway. So if we'd saved him to be a top old horse, he maybe would have been lame anyway, so we'd never have used
exactly, because some of that toughness and lameness is in the genes, isn't it?
Yes, you've got to decide, do I use him up when he's young and feeling great and go for it, and let's hope, or do I save him for when he's old and wise and going to be amazing and he might be lame anyway? It's very hard to know what that is, but he would be an example, doing Leon at 6 and 7 and winning Tats at 8 and Blenheim at 9 and winning, I think he won Pau at 9, was all quite amazing and great.
Quite amazing, wasn't it?
But I convinced myself that God didn't make him to make old bones.
Yeah, so go and enjoy him while you're young.
I'd like to think I wasn't wrong, but I do look back and think, oh God, I wish maybe that I'd waited.
He might have had nothing. He might have not had his young son. I'm just thinking, if you press on chat, William, I don't know, you probably are. I've just popped to see what everybody's questions are. And immediately somebody's asked neck strap, how do you attach it? Because now there's a rule, isn't there? And I quite understand why, because surely somebody's put their foot through the neck strap and pulled themselves down.
No, I know all about that.
Yeah, tell me.
That's bloody FEI, and I'm on the committee.
Yes.
Someone convinced someone someday that maybe if the neck strap was too loose and the horse nosedived, the neck strap went up the neck, the horse could get its foot through a neck strap. It never happened.
I thought it must have happened.
No, but David O'Connor thought it might happen. So he and I have a banter about that. It now has to be attached, which is a load of rubbish. And you attach it either to the D-ring with a blinking flash strap or something, or you attach, and it's just more clobber, but it's very manageable, very easy to do. Or you can attach it at the base under the bottom to the breastplate with a little D-ring fastener. It's very easy to do, but it's just what I call FEI CRAP.
Very polite. I'm looking down.
How can I see chats?
Oh, press chat at the bottom. You should have a. Here's the most untechy person in the world telling the next most untechy person. It says share screen, participants record, and one of those says chat. And if you press that, you'll get the questions.
Mine just says more.
Click more.
Yeah,
Click more.
More says real tech.
Okay, I've got it.
So, as some horses have had reduced experience for injury, asks Nick Bevan, are we now, because of COVID, etc., would you treat them as being a year younger now? They are starting off again. Good question, Nick.
That's a good question. Yeah, totally. Surely age is just to do with mileage, nothing to do with.
Yeah, that's very well put.
It's not to do with a calendar.
Mileage. That's a lovely sort of play on words. Age is mile age. Age is mileage. Yeah, exactly. Lovely. So there, Liz talks about trek, which is a really fun thing where they do all sorts of different things at walk and trot and go under ropes and run. You could explain it better than I, Liz, but trek training with young horses is really helpful, I bet. Slows the whole process down and helps with concentration and fitness in a gentle way. TREC, I don't know. It's called something else in America, and it's absolutely riveting. People have whole courses that people do in walk, and big boulders they have to go over the top of and round, and then bridges and seesaws. The horse has to walk up, and then it goes like that and have to walk down. I don't know what it's called, but it's a wonderful sport. And when I get too frightened to go out and walk, that's the one I'll do.
It seems like a great idea, though. Ideal thing to do with a horse, to just get him strong and get him looking at doing things and learning to go first and be brave. And no pressure. No
pressure, because everything's in walk, in trek. I don't know about trek, but certainly in this thing in America, whose name I can't remember. Now, Sally Ann's got a question here. Oh, I love this. Nick saying, I've had a few cock-ups lately. In other words, that must be run-outs. You better go to William, not me. If a horse runs out of room, Sally Ann asks, say in a combination, downhill to open a stride, possibly, then I would rather they had a glance off than hit the fence and it all go horribly wrong. Sally Ann, if you were sitting well back, your horse would shorten in that combination and get his legs out the way, because he doesn't want to hit it any more than you do. I don't know what you would say to that, William. Can you see Sally Ann's question down there?
I'm just looking at it now.
If a horse runs out of room.
No, you see, he's got to work it out, I would say.
He's got to work it out, yeah.
Yes, he's got to work it out. And if he gets it horribly wrong, he'll learn to stand up.
Yeah.
But he's not allowed to have another go.
And just as a matter of interest, Sally Ann, a downhill fence, the first stride downhill is usually shorter anyhow. So usually the second stride can be where they get into trouble if the down gravity pulls them down. But if you can get onto the back of that seesaw, it doesn't matter what you look like, just don't buy the photo if you're worried. They will get their front end out of it somehow, because they do not want to fall. If I ever met a horse that didn't mind falling, I promise you it would be in the dog tin.
But they've got to learn from doing it the wrong way, by not listening to you, by getting long downhill. They've got to learn from their cock-ups, not going around a run out, having a second go and going slower. They've got to think, actually, I don't want to next time I'm going too fast. I will jolly well slow down.
Yes,
no,
yes.
I don't want you to have a rotational fall and a horrible nasty, but that really isn't very likely going to happen. But I would say, he's got to learn, you've got to sit back and he's got to get on with it.
Yeah, well, we agree on that one. And Nick has come back with lead a young horse on a lunge line over a ditch has always worked for her or him. Don't know what you are, Nick, sorry. Encouragement provided by cracking a lunge without striking the horse. Exactly. Very rarely does one ever need that. But I do agree with you, getting off takes away a lot of the fight. But the mare that was pushed over the ditch with the show jumping pole, I promise you, she'd been off for hours. You're saying that's how to start them off, and I totally agree. They follow, when they've got confidence in the handler, they very often follow them up and down banks, over water, into water, over ditches. Totally agree with you.
Do that a lot in Ireland, don't they? They learn to lead them and then they learn to long rein them, and the horse learns to then go first, still without a rider on. So it's a very good way. I think that's a great, great way. Sometimes get off, lead, and then they learn.
Usually. We had one last night that I left on the Isle of Wight at about 7 o'clock to go and catch the ferry over. This little girl who had the most stubborn pony, you know what they're like. It was this big, the little drop down into the water. It had been in and out of the water 100 times. It come up the bank 100 times and it would not step down it. It ate the grass at the edge. It put its head down. She was standing in the water. And I left saying, email me if you get it. And she emailed me and said, he went in backwards, but he wouldn't go in forwards. So every now and again, and it really was 9 inches, every now and again you do just meet these incredibly stubborn people. And I was so sorry because she had the guts to stay behind when everybody had gone, and one girl stayed with her, and she was only about 15, and she did try so hard and she did get it.
Are you going to read out Robin's questions? Quite good.
What is it?
But we had trainers who say that you must treat your horse as a machine to get from A to B. At what point is this the case? And when do you stop mollycoddling them? That's a very good point.
It is a very good point. I mean, it almost comes to mind, when do you first ask a horse to jump straight into water without running through it first and jumping over something out of water first? It comes a point when you have to say to the horse, and I call it sudden death, you just got to jump straight into this new water you've never seen. I reckon it doesn't come till about novice level. I don't know when you reckon they should jump into water having never been in the water before.
I would agree. I would say nearly every time I go schooling, I would splash through the water first. I think most people would. But of course, you get to an event and you suddenly got to get straight on in there. But then, of course, as an event, you've got your adrenaline and you're competing and everything kind of goes a bit more naturally. When you're schooling and cold blood is a very different question for many horses. And I agree. Yes, your horse has got to finally get on with it, but you've really got to read when that day is.
It's an interesting question. When do you stop mollycoddling it? And when do you go from saying to the horse, right, you've got all the time in the world to read, but you're not stopping? And I'm always saying to my horse, you can look, that's fine, but you're not stopping.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, get on with it. And we've got a Dutchman with us at the minute who's a very late developer mentally and physically. He's probably coming 8 now. And he's been shying, you know. I'm sorry, I'm a bit anti the warm bloods because they are on the whole so spooky. He's been shying all the time. And now Alyssa says to him, no, you've seen that dock leaf enough, get on with it. And she's now quite tough on him and it's really working. He's really sort of saying, yeah, okay, I shouldn't spook now. I do know what a dock leaf looks like. Because, you know, you've got to introduce them to life. But then at some point, as you rightly say, Robin, come on, march with the tune now, boy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That there's got to be a day, isn't there, that they man up.
They man up. That's it. Put your big boys' pants on. Simulate, asks Liz, in your pole jump training with what is out on the young horse tracks. Oh, you mean if you aren't lucky enough to get down some tracks to show your horse a bit about life, try and do it with some poles in. Maybe that's what you mean.
Is that English?
That is English. She's quite a neighbour, actually, that one.
I'm not reading that very well.
Do you think, I'm not reading very well either, do you think weight of sport horses is an issue and should be left a bit longer? Weight, you mean if they're middleweight or lightweight? Or if they're fat or thin? I think they should be quite thin.
I think if they're big, heavy chunkamunkers, they need more time.
Yeah, exactly.
I think simple as that. They're like a person.
And I mean, talking about fat and thin, people do tend to believe the 85 different feed companies there are in this country alone and feed their horses way, way too much. So they then, surprise, surprise, can't ride them. And then they learn all sorts of naughty habits because they're feeding so cheeky. The horses don't need a lot of feed. They need their basic vitamins and minerals. And a lot of people just feed chaff and balancer, and that can be plenty for a young horse. And when it gets to this time of year and the sugar's coming through in the grass, golly, hang on tight. They don't need any hard food. But I'd always rather have my horse, I don't like a thin horse, but I'd always rather have him thinner rather than fatter because it's pounds per square inch of tendon. And I know those tendons are going to have to last me a very long time. So if I've got him really fat and the ground is getting a bit hard, he ain't going to stay sound so long, is my feeling.
And he needs to be an athlete, and athletes aren't fat.
Well, that's a good way of putting it. I'm a little bit lost with your cable ties there. Sorry. It's called obstacle training in America. I wish I could remember what that damn thing was called. I'm going to look it up on my iPhone. That sport that I went to a cross-country training place where I'd been for 15 years, and they'd just built a course for this sort of American form of trek, and it was absolutely fascinating. We used it for our event training because you couldn't not. It was just such brilliant hand-eye coordination work for the horse. It was all done in walk. So here's Richard Norfolk. How would you give confidence to a horse that has been taught that if it naps and reverses back when going into a new place to jump either slalom or cross country, it doesn't have to do it? As soon as she gets going after a big argument, the mare is fine. Yes, I mean, it is a problem in a competition because you nap and reverse, and after a bit the fence judge says 2 refusals, 3 refusals, leave the course please, and they win. Your horse wins. It doesn't have to go into that dark place, and you're not always allowed back on the course at the end of the day, and they give you things like the ambulance has gone and the insurance doesn't cover it, and bloody music. Because you do need to get back, and if necessary, get off and lead your horse through the place it won't go, because they mustn't learn not to trust you, because the whole of your jumping training and all the training you do actually, but we are talking about cross country, so we'll keep to that, but it's all about developing the horse's trust in you. Remember, he came from prehistoric times where a swamp would kill him. If he went in there, he got stuck and he didn't come out, or a crevasse, a ditch, if he got into that, he's not coming out of that either. So we're hoping to help him learn to trust us over and above his instincts. And that building of trust is why I love to do so many different things with my horse. It don't necessarily involve jumping or a cross-country course, but hacking up and down like we talked about last time, all the rough off-piste stuff, because they've got to believe in you. So when they nap at somewhere and don't go and you have to leave the course, that's a huge hole is now going to appear in the trust, and you need somehow, even if you have to come back the next day and you probably live hours away, it is worth trying to plug that gap. Would you say, William?
Yeah, and I think, with the napping, I don't know the situation, but you've got to make sure you've either got someone there to lead him into the ring or to lead him in the place he doesn't like to go. He's not allowed to turn around and spin and stand up and nap. Or you've got to have slightly trained him that if someone is behind him, that someone is quite scary. And the best way to go is well away from that person. Not you, it's you and the horse are on the same side of the fence. But have someone on the ground saying, if you come back towards me, you're gonna get a surprise. They learn very quickly there's one way to go.
Yes, that's a good idea if you're lucky enough to have a friend who'll stand there.
You need to make sure if you've got a nappy horse, I'm afraid you have to have a very nice friend who will do just that, because you've got no option.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Robin, how will one's approach to a fence help the horse to read the potential obstacle coming, e.g. a coffin, canter, or a flat gallop? I don't think any of us would be going any speed just until we feel the horses can read at speed. And then, yes, let's go. Let's get on with it. Let's have fun. I mean, they love the wind in their hair. A lot of horses love that feeling of speed, just like people do. But to start with, you're popping around in a pretty ordinary canter. But that's where we have to be careful, because the canter must still, when the horse does see the fence, and that's our job, to get him to see it as early as possible, he must desire it. Even if he's slowing to look at it, he must be saying, yes, I want it. I just don't quite get what it is. And it's up to us to try and develop early sight and desire, and none of those things are going to happen at a flat gallop. But once he starts to go fast, his confidence is usually there to do it. The race, you've dealt with the racing horses who will lob over little logs and tiny hurdles quite slowly, won't they, first of all? And they don't pick up speed for quite a long time, the ones that I've seen, but you might have seen differently, William.
But I think there's a lot of kind of confusion here between, speed. Sometimes people feel that, if they go faster on a cross-country horse goes so much better because he hasn't got time to see all the problems. And that's a very confusing message that people sometimes feed off. I think it's very important the horse isn't needing to go fast and have his adrenaline up to jump a jump. He's got to actually learn what he's doing at a slower speed, and then introducing speed as he's getting experience. Whereas a lot of beginners think that cross country, you know, oh, he didn't go so well because I went much slower, is a very common comment that I don't like, because I think that's a sign the horse doesn't really know what he's doing. Just
Yeah,
the
because
speed is kind of dulling down the spook.
If you take a lot of horses that haven't been particularly well educated, and maybe have already got quite high up the ladder, and you ask them to walk a ditch or walk a bank or whatever, they don't know what to do. They've never seen it close to. And
They've never
there
done
was a fashion, I don't know if you met it, but there's one or two pretty good trainers in my youth, and I don't know if it happened to you, that said, keep his head up, don't let him see the ditch. And I absolutely abhor that, because I simply say to people, if your best friend lied to you, would he still be your best friend? Because by keeping that horse's head up, you're not letting him see the ditch. He gets in the air and he goes, holy Moses, what's that underneath my legs? I'm not going to trust her or him again. So I think you've got to let them see, and you won't be able to do that if you're going fast. But going slowly can be so painful. They must still want to go. They must still have some fight, some aggression in each stride, but they're just covering a lot of ground very quickly. Would that be the way to put it?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I think yes, don't cover up things with speed, whether it's, you know, going too fast, or, you know, sometimes we need to go fast because that makes us feel braver.
Now, there's an interesting one from Sally here, the last one on our list at the minute. Would you take an advanced horse who gets very keen on the cross country back to walking, trotting small fences in training?
Totally.
If he got a bit wired, or and have
Ideal.
you found that?
Yeah.
Even with horses you've trained yourself, it's different if you've taken them on from somebody else. But if horses you've trained yourself, do you find sometimes they just get a bit panicky, a little bit sort of worried, a little bit trying too hard?
Yeah, I totally do, and I have days with my top horses that I'll just have trot jumping days, just days when they only jump from trot, or days when I go cross country schooling and I poke around over, you know, trot jumps. They don't need to go off and jump skinnies and arrowheads and drops into water and stuff, and just really relax with what they're doing and have a fun time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things in a higher level horse that he often gets a huge amount of questions thrown at him very, very quickly are water combinations. And you add to that the splash and the uncertainty of where the legs are, especially if the water is a little bit on the deeper side, although it's only allowed to be 30 centimeters, I believe. I think a lot of horses get quite wrought in water as they get through to advance. And I'll spend plenty of time walking through water, walking up and down the banks, trotting through water, trotting up and down the bank, and maybe lolloping in canter, but just not do anything difficult. So you can, it's not that bad actually, water, it's quite fun.
Yeah, it's all right, exactly. That's a very good point. But just taking it slowly is nearly always the answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I say again, especially when you're teaching people who aren't so experienced, be careful, because slow can disappear behind the leg. They must still feel the horse is taking them. And I say to people, you must still have desire in a horse, even if you're jumping out of walk. They must walk towards it as if they want to jump it. And actually, I've just remembered another place where you and I differ, because I think it's always fun to show that not everybody rows down the same track. That I walk jump, and if I teach anybody to walk jump, they're not allowed to put a stride or trot in, because I want them to learn how to help their horses rock back and rocket off the floor. And if you do it well and get rocket boost, you will be thrown right out the plate. And some people don't like that, but it's a good thing to learn that too, because it's going to happen on the cross country course.
And I think William, I'm going to interrupt you there, because I think that's a really good point going forward, is that sometimes when you go slowly, things aren't smooth. So as a rider, you are a bit uncomfortable, you're a little bit unsure, you're a little bit sometimes in front or sometimes back, or sometimes stiff or sometimes too wobbly. You actually put yourself in positions that you've got to learn to recover from. And I think very often we go cross country schooling with our young horses and it's all got to be perfect and lovely and jumping and cantering and feeling marvelous. That's all great, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes we've got to learn to adjust, sit up, recover, adapt to plan B or C immediately. We've got to learn to be sharp. So sometimes when we go cross country schooling, it's quite good for it not to be perfect and pretty.
Handsome is as handsome does is one of the great terms, and I think you need to run. I often say to people, if you want to look wonderful, then don't buy the picture. But if I was you, do what Philip Dutton does, one of the great riders in America who's Australian by birth. And he's got a whole big frame in his tack room, apparently, full of all those moments. It just shows people that to get to the top, there's going to be many, many moments, and you've just got to survive them as best you can. Pretty is out the window.
Right, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but time is ticking on.